Get comfortable with English in comfort. This is your English listening practice podcast to help you learn and improve naturally.
Hey everyone, I'm James.
And I'm Anna.
Anna, it's great to be back with you.
Well, same here, James. Glad to be here.
So, do you know what phrasal verbs are?
Of course, like for example, the phrase sit down, right?
Exactly. And that's our topic today. Let me explain it simply for everyone. Let's use the verb put. We all know put, right? Like, put the cup on the table. But if you add a tiny word, like up, and make put up, the meaning completely changes. It becomes something new. Now it means to build or raise something. For example, we need to put up the new picture on the wall.
And it's always verbs with a little word added.
Yup, always with verbs. That's why we call them phrasal verbs. You take a verb and add a small word, and suddenly it's a phrase with a new meaning. We find these in almost every conversation. For example, I will look after the dog. Look after is another phrasal verb we use all the time, which just means you'll take care of something.
Today we're focusing on the ones we use in our daily routine.
When you talk about your day, getting up, checking messages, cooking, walking the dog, phrasal verbs pop up a lot. There are a lot of them. And they're actually pretty easy once you know how to use them.
So what we'll do next is play a short conversation between the two of us. Let's listen first. And hey, don't worry if you don't catch everything the first time, because we'll explain everything right after.
That's right. We will break it down for you.
Morning, James. You look a bit tired. Didn't sleep well?
Not really. I woke up at 6:30, but I didn't want to get up. The alarm kept ringing.
I know that feeling. I usually wake up at 7 and hit snooze at least once. Then I rush to freshen up and get dressed.
Same here sometimes. After I get dressed, I usually put on my gym shoes and head out for a quick run.
A run before work? That's impressive. I just make breakfast and try to tidy up the kitchen a little before I set off.
My breakfast is coffee. I pick up a cup on the way. Sometimes I grab a croissant if I'm really hungry.
Smiling coffee is my best friend too. So, after work, what do you usually do?
First, I try to clock out on time. Then I clean up the living room, put on a podcast, and relax. That helps me wind down.
I usually pick up a book after dinner. Reading helps me get through the stress of the day.
That's smart. I usually just watch my favorite shows until I feel worn out. I really should turn off the TV earlier.
I think we all do that, don't we?
All right, let's take a closer look at the phrasal verbs from our little morning conversation.
Let's start with the most common one. Wake up. I mean, we all use this one because it's something we do every single day.
Right? In our conversation, I said, I woke up at 6:30. Notice that I used the past tense. I said woke up because I was talking about something in the past. It already happened.
But if you talk about your daily habits, for example, you keep it in the present. Like, I usually wake up at 7. Or, what time do you wake up on weekends?
And here's something important when we talk about phrasal verbs. You need that little word up. If you just say, I wake at 7, it doesn't sound natural in English. You really have to say, wake up.
And that's exactly why you need to learn phrasal verbs as they are. Just adding one small word to a verb can make a big difference.
Okay, let's move to the next one we used. Get up.
Get up is when you actually leave the bed, when you stand up and start your day.
In our conversation, I said, I didn't want to get up. And honestly, I think everyone feels like that sometimes.
Sometimes I wake up but stay in bed forever, just scrolling on my phone.
Same here. But how long do you usually stay in bed before you actually get up?
Well, yesterday, I think I stayed almost 2 hours.
2 hours? That's too much, don't you think?
Maybe. But you know how it is. You keep scrolling and suddenly 2 hours are gone.
Yeah, true. All right, let's get back to our topic. The next phrasal verb to use when talking about your daily routine is hit snooze.
For example, I said, I usually hit snooze at least once, which means I press that button on the alarm and it goes quiet, and then it comes back later.
Yep. And lots of people do that. Sometimes you wake up, then hit snooze, then finally get up.
So after waking up and finally getting out of bed, what's the next step?
Freshen up. In our conversation, I said something like, I rush to freshen up.
Freshen up is just a quick way to say you quickly wash your face, brush your teeth, maybe splash some water so you feel alive again.
Exactly. It's not like a long shower, more like a quick reset.
Right. For example, if someone says, I'll just freshen up before dinner, they mean they'll quickly wash and look a bit cleaner, not spend an hour in the bathroom.
And I think most of us do that in the morning. Just freshen up quickly before we get dressed.
Speaking of that, get dressed is the next phrasal verb, a simple but very common one.
It just means put on your clothes. And by the way, put on is also a phrasal verb we use in daily routine conversations. Like, I usually put on my gym shoes.
Put on is when you wear a specific item. You can put on shoes, a jacket, a hat.
Okay, so after you're dressed and ready, what happens next?
In our conversation, you said you usually head out for a run, right?
Yep. Head out just means leave the house to go somewhere. I said, I usually put on my gym shoes and head out for a quick run.
I like this expression. I think it sounds more casual than just saying leave. Like instead of I leave for work at 8, you can say I head out at 8. It's friendlier and more natural.
You could even say, let's head out in 5 minutes, if you're about to go somewhere with friends.
Right. And for me, before I head out to work, I usually try to tidy up the kitchen a little.
Tidy up. That's another good phrasal verb. It just means make things neater. Not deep cleaning, just a quick fix.
Exactly, like putting the dishes in the sink, wiping the table, maybe putting things back where they belong. Don't you also feel better when you tidy up before leaving? Otherwise, you come home to a mess, and that's the worst.
totally agree with that, Anna. And then you said in our conversation, before I set off. That's another way to say leave, right?
That's right. Set off is usually when you're starting a trip or journey. For example, we set off early in the morning to avoid traffic.
But you can also use it for smaller things like going to work. I set off around 8:30.
So, head out and set off are kind of similar, but set off feels a little more about the start of a trip, while head out is everyday casual. Let's move on to the next phrasal verb. In the conversation, you said, I pick up a cup of coffee on the way.
Pick up. Here it just means to collect or get something, like I picked up a sandwich for lunch, or can you pick up some milk on your way home?
And it is so common too. We also said, I usually pick up a book after dinner. It works for coffee, books, groceries, even picking up your kids from school.
Right. Okay, so then we had clock out. In the conversation, I said, first, I try to clock out on time.
That's a very workplace kind of expression, isn't it?
Definitely. Clock out comes from the old days when workers used a time card machine. You would literally punch a card to show you finished work. These days, we still say clock out even if it's digital.
So basically, clock out just means to finish work. Like, I clock out at 5 today.
Yep. And you'll also hear clock in, which is the opposite when you start work. I clock in at 9 every morning.
And after you clock out, you said you usually clean up the living room.
That's right. Clean up is similar to tidy up, but it feels a little bigger.
Yeah, like with tidy up, you just make things look neat. But with clean up, you're actually wiping surfaces, vacuuming, maybe washing dishes.
Exactly. For example, let's clean up after the party. Or, he cleaned up his desk before leaving. Okay, so after cleaning up, I said I put on a podcast and relax. And I also said that helps me wind down.
Wind down. It's such a nice way to say relax. You don't just stop working, you wind down, like slowly calming yourself after a busy day.
Exactly. Like a clock slowly stopping. You could say, I usually wind down with a cup of tea.
For me, reading is the best way to wind down. Which is why in our conversation I said, reading helps me get through the stress of the day.
Right. Get through. That's another phrasal verb. It just means to survive or manage something that's hard.
Like, how did you get through that exam? Or, I got through a really tough week at work. It's about finishing or surviving without getting so tired or sick. Then, James, you mentioned watching your favorite shows until you feel worn out.
Yep. Worn out just means being really, really tired. For example, after that long hike, I was completely worn out.
Or, she felt worn out after working all weekend. It's a very natural way to say you're exhausted.
And that's why I said I should turn off the TV earlier.
Turn off is another everyday phrasal verb. It's just switching something off. The TV, the lights, your computer. Can you turn off the fan? Or don't forget to turn off the oven.
Yeah, super common. And in my case, I stay up too late because I forget to turn off the TV.
I think we all do that sometimes.
True. And that's it for today's episode of English Phrasal Verbs for talking about daily routine.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Now, what about you? Tell us in the comments below about your usual daily routine. And make sure to use some of the phrasal verbs we learned today.
Don't forget to subscribe for more English listening and speaking practice, daily phrases and everyday conversations, English tips, and so much more.
Thanks for letting us be part of your learning journey.
Keep practicing, keep improving, and take care, everyone.